Hi, we're Trench Tactics. I'm Nicholas.
I'm Kel.
I'm Steve. So this is kind of like the setup, as you can see in front of you, of how our board might look like throughout the game. So there's a few different pieces on our board. First of all, we have our generals. So the general is kind of like the most important piece of our game. It's kind of like the king in chess, where he has a certain, well, in this he has a certain amount of hit points. He has 3. But he is your most important piece. If he winds up dying, you wind up losing the game. The general also has a few different conditions that he can do. When paired with fighters, he will allow the fighters to do double damage during attacks. When in a box at the beginning of a turn, a player can decide whether they want to put down one of our trenches, which is another win condition that I'll explain in a little bit. And he can only put that on the adjacent lines next to his current box. And so we'll go into trenches now. So the second win condition for our game is a player. I don't know if you guys can see on the board here. There's a blue line here and an orange line here. If the Entente or Central Powers get to that orange line and they begin building a trench across that line or further closer to the opponent's trench, and they build all the way across, so five across, they will win the game. So there are different ways that trenches kind of work, and players can either place their trench, but they also need to defend their trenches because they can be overrun by the other player if they're undefended, and then taken over and changed to the other side. So in fights, trenches also offer an defensive bonus where they will cost a player or fighter to try and invade those trenches. So now that we talked about trenches, let's go into a little bit how our fighters work. So a player can develop fighters throughout the game by collecting their materials. And the fighters are the only way that a player can be offensive in the game, but also support their general with a little bit of defensive. So like I said, when paired with a general, the fighters will do double damage on attack. They also have 1 hit point, so that kind of serves as an HP bag. So let's say I had 2 fighters with my general against Nick's 1 fighter and his general. I will do 4 damage. Nick will take 1 damage, and his general will die, and he'll lose the game. So yeah, that's kind of how the fighters work. We also have some dice here. So another little aspect of the general is as he progresses further away from his home trench, he'll produce more and more materials. So at the beginning of every single turn, a player will decide whether they want to produce food or scrap, which can be used in different aspects of the game to produce fighters, trenches, and the last aspect of our game, which is vehicles. So the vehicles make it so that all things that are on top of the vehicle, so whether it's a fighter or their general, can move 2 spaces rather than 1. So we have a few different games that we played both in here and separately that kind of inspired our board design and some of the aspects that we have in our game. So first of all, these guys both love this game, but I wasn't a huge fan of it. It was a little too complicated for me. But Scythe. So our resource gathering, we kind of originally had the idea of basing it off of Scythe, where you would have different types of workers and pieces go out into the field and try and collect resources. We've obviously changed that with our final product. But we also took the inspiration from the actual units. So in Scythe you have a main general, and then you also have certain fighters that will go out and fight for you. So we also took inspiration from chess. Basically had the idea of slow moving. We kind of took the rook and the king and kind of combined them. Got rid of the diagonal road movement, but only allowed pieces to move 1 at a time. And yeah, this game kind of causes people to think multiple turns in ahead and kind of think about what their opponent might want to do and try and counteract what they're going to do. So the last game that we kind of thought about when we were making this was Diplomacy, where we had like the simple fight mechanism that Diplomacy kind of employed. And yeah, 1 unit gave 1 power.
All right, so we're going to walk you through, I'll walk you through a quick little starting hand because it's kind of complicated if you don't see anything. So in order to see who goes first, you roll dice. It's really hard to see here, but blue roll, I think that's a 5, and red rolled a 19. So Central's going to go first here. Central's first move, they're going to move their general up 1 square, which is going to give them 1 production next turn. And then blue does the same, but on a different lane. Next turn comes around, really hard to see in the photo, but the Central produced 1 scrap and moved 1 forward to, again, gain 1 more production next turn. Next turn happens again. You can actually kind of see on this time. The blue dice is turned to 1, which means the Entente also produced 1 scrap and moved 1 forward. Next turn, the Central produced 2 food and used that 2 food and 1 scrap to produce a fighter all the way in the back there, which he'll start marching up the board. And then the Entente did the same exact thing, and now we're at a pretty wide board position here. There's a lot of things that could happen. The General could move forward again and boost production, but the Entente would have to come up with their fighter and defend that. The Central Powers could bring up their fighter and push around the other General because he's out in the open with nothing to defend. Scrap could be made, trenches could be built. There's a lot of things that you can do, and there's a lot of avenues that the game can take. It's not very complicated, low skill floor, really high skill ceiling.
Alright, so for theming the game, we were kind of sitting down, like, we had no clue what we were going to make at the start. And then Nick had the fantastic idea of, like, being able to make physical trenches on the board itself. So that's when we started to play off of that idea, and we wanted to make, like, a very tactical, just 1v1 scenario. So we based it around just one front of the war, and we had 2 generals on opposite sides of this front, eventually having the goal of taking over the front. So they're slowly, like, making ground, they're pushing the line of defense. It's a very back and forth. And then let's see. So time and audience. This should be accessible to most players. The rulebook can be a little daunting when you take a look at it first, but if you just play it out, it becomes pretty intuitive, I believe. And then the time can vary. It usually only takes like 20 minutes, and then a better player can absolutely school a new player. Think of it like a chess match. If you get scholars mated, that's only like 4 turns. But eventually both players get good enough to not get scholars mated.
One more.
And then, so just a look into how we designed this. This went through a lot of iterations. Again, we started with just the idea of trenches and like having a 1v1. And from there, we slapped down a board. We started cutting out little paper pieces, moving around, and just saw what worked. We saw early on that the idea of generals worked. We saw that a like tight 5x5 board space worked pretty well. Trenches felt pretty good, but we had a lot of other stuff. So like, as Steve mentioned, we took a lot more inspiration from Scythe to start. So scrap and food were physical tiles on the board, and you would have to move workers into these spaces. This was alright, but as we played the game more and more, we realized there were best strategies, and eventually player 2 just did not have a good time. Because player 1 would just move away to completely lock player 2 out of the game. So we kept on trying to figure this out. We went through different board designs, we tried a 5x7. Eventually we're just like, alright, this isn't working. We're going to cut it completely. We shifted the production to just be, localized to you. Your opponent couldn't mess with it. So we just had to go through a lot of different rules changes like that, where we just kept on playing it over and over, figured out what worked. Obviously, we're not graphic design students, so we didn't create the best looking thing, but we took a gameplay first approach that really worked best for us and kind of filled in around that.
I think it's done there.
Yep.
Nice. Questions?
Yeah.
Worked. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I like it. It's nice. Listen to this.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Mercedes,
I'm Ryan.
Jacob, Harrison, Andrew.
and today we're presenting an overview of our World War I tabletop game, Mentation. So, when we designed this game, we had a particular theme in mind, and that had to do with healthcare in the military, and the fact that many of the World War I board games that we played over the semester overshadowed this and didn't focus on it at all. A few problems that we found that were missing from these games had to do with war casualties. Places like the Somme and Verdun had extremely huge numbers, but when you look at these on just a slideshow and take them at face value, it doesn't mean a lot. So we needed a game that could kind of convey the fact that these numbers represented people who were either severely injured or killed in these battles, and that they matter too. And it's not all about glory winning a war game, it's about these people. Another thing has to do with the medical side of things. After these patients are brought back from the battlefield wounded, it's not like they just get magically cured once they enter the triage tent. This takes time, and it's critical that this time is fast, right? Critical management of patients in a short time period is really difficult, and our game aims to try to simulate that. And overall, we just need to put the point across that it's really difficult to save soldiers from the battlefield, and that's where the timed aspect of this game comes in. So when creating this game, we needed two things to happen. We needed to get our message across that we wanted from the previous slide, but we also wanted it to be fun to play. Nobody wants a game that's boring and that's hard to set up and it's difficult to understand. So that's the main thing. We wanted to be simple and fun, but also to incorporate these ideas that we have. And the idea with Mentation is that we take these two things and we put them together to make a simple and fun board game that presents a message. So for engagement purposes, we focused on 1 versus 1 battles to keep it very simple and concise. We didn't want a large battlefield because we realized that board games that have huge boards were really clunky and difficult to set up, and honestly took way longer than we wanted to play the full game. We wanted there to be a strategy aspect, so card counting is something that comes into play for this game. Being able to predict what your opponent's going to put down on the board, as we'll go over later, is really important. So it's still strategic, but it's not something that really takes a high level of thinking. Our particular theater, people refer to theater as places where military activities occur. In this case, our theater is not a battlefield, it's the surgery theater, right? We're talking about moving from the battlefield to a place where healing cards are played, where you have to think critically, not about fighting somebody, about helping somebody, which is a big turn from a lot of these board games that we've played and what their goal is. And then we do have a resource management aspect, where the cards that you play to attack and to heal are limited. And this is kind of to simulate the stress it feels about allocating resources to critical patients, and how sometimes you need to make quick, correct decisions at the risk of somebody else's life down the line.
So I want to briefly speak about the game mechanics. And so we were able to create, I'll show you guys, our own cards. There's 4 types of cards, really 3. I'll just point to here. So these are what we call the Mentation cards. They're the points. It's kind of just like a reference to, see how you score at the end of each round. The 3 main types of cards, though, there's soldier cards, attack cards, and medical cards. Now, your soldier card is a standard soldier card. It has a health value, it has a name, and we're not graphic artists, so we have a very outline of a man right there, just to keep it simple. That's who you're initially playing into war. That's who you're going to send out into battle. The second card is the attack card, or we call them the weaponry. This is what you're going to use to attack the other opponent's soldier cards. They have their own damage value. So when you play that card, it will take off the health of the soldier card. And then our last card is the medical card. This is during the triage tent phase, where you're applying, this is basically where you're trying to heal your soldier. And each card has their own success ranges. So, for example, I'll pick up this card right here. It has success ranges. So with the dice, you will roll to your success. So this one's called forceps bullet removal. You will get septicemia, which is minus 2 HP if you roll 1 to 3. You have failed, because sometimes in the war tents, you fail. If you roll 7 to 10, that's a success, and your soldier's healed, 2 health. That's what these dice are for. They're 1 to 10. Each card has different ranges. This 20 dice, that is your total mentation throughout the game. So you'll start at 15, and at a round, if you happen to lose 3, you go down to 12. And Andrew will speak later on about how the mentation scale really works in the win condition. And finally, we have these poker chips. There are tokens. They're used during the triage phase as well. When you finish up healing, you assign a token per whatever health the soldier may end up being. Now, when we were designing this game, we had a couple goals in mind. as Mercedes touched on, the rule book, we want it to be simple, straightforward, easy. We have 3 pages. One's a little synopsis. Second page is just about the components. Third page is brief about gameplay. We really just wanted it to be easy. The age range, we thought 12 plus would be a fair one. You know, players need to do simple math. It's a bit of a heavy topic about, you know, health and mental strength. So I think 12 plus is fair range. Playtime, like approximate game, we played it probably around 20 to 30 minutes based on your skill level. I can imagine if you played a lot and you want to challenge yourself more in the timed aspect of the game, it'll probably shorten down. And simple pieces, it's 3 decks of cards and a bunch of poker chips. It's very easy. It's a very small box we have. You don't want to be able to lose your pieces, and again, as you said, having a large board game kind of just creates clutter. This is a very game you can bring on the go, play in the airport, wherever you need to.
So the phases of the gameplay start first by you pick your soldiers and you pick your attack cards. Put your soldiers down on the field and then you attack the other side. Obviously representing the battle that would be taking place. After that, you know, theoretical lull in the battle or the battle's over, you have to bring your troops in and you have to, you know, attempt to rescue them or at the very least stabilize them. And that's where the triage phase comes in, where in a timed aspect you have to apply medication to the person. You have to roll to make sure that it succeeded, and then you have to decide, and then you have to figure out if they were stabilized, if they were healed, if they just straight out died. And then after it's all done, you look at what happened, and then you adjust your mentation accordingly, which you want to obviously have the most amount of mentation because that means you were managing not only attacking the other player correctly, but then also surviving and keeping your troops alive.
So getting into what a turn looks like, during our first phase, the battlefield phase, both players are going to draw soldier cards and attack cards. They're going to draw 3 soldier cards and 5 attack cards, and then they're going to keep the 3 attack cards that they like the best. Once they do this, they're going to play the 3 soldier cards that you can see in the left picture, and they're going to flip them over one by one. And all these soldier cards have a different health value. And so once you play your soldier cards, you're going to then play your attack cards one by one on your opponent's soldier cards. And those are going to do damage to the health of your opponent's soldier cards, which you can see in the second picture. And then after this phase, you're going to move on to the triage phase.
So after the battlefield phase, we move on to the triage phase. The players have 40 seconds to complete this phase and complete all 4 items here. First, the players pick up 3 medical cards and they place them behind the soldiers right here. And then they roll the dice to determine if the medical card is effective or a failure. After the dice are rolled, tokens are assigned, and right here we have different tokens for different points, and it's based on the soldier's health. So right here, token's red, that means that the soldier is either 2 health, 3 health, or 4 health. And then after all the tokens are assigned, we tally up all the tokens to get your meditation points. But another aspect is if the time runs out and you don't apply your the correct tokens, or you didn't apply a token at all, then the soldier automatically gets a black card and they're considered dead.
It's important that we point out where the inspiration for these tokens come from. If you look at an MCI kit, which is a mass casualty incident kit, you have tags. When triaging people in a mass casualty incident, say like a bus crash, you go up to them, you have to check certain criteria. If they fail these, they are black tagged. Like if there's no hope to save them within a short amount of time, then you apply that black tag. That's what this black token is supposed to be representing. That these patients were not able to be helped in a short amount of time. You failed to apply help to them soon enough within that 40-second period. And so it's kind of, hope is lost, they're gone, right? So that's why time management is so important here, because if you can't get these tokens on these soldiers, then you know that one of them's automatically done. It doesn't matter if they have like 8 health, right? Simple bullet wound that you don't try to treat could turn septic and they can die. So that's what we're trying to simulate here. Another thing that's important to point out is that you see if soldier points have a high enough health point where they have over 9 HP after medical cards were applied, we're considering that an over allocation of resources, which is a waste. In the battlefield, you do not want to apply a tourniquet to somebody who's not hemorrhaging, right? That's what this is representing. You lose mentation points for wasting materials on people who don't need it. That's what's trying to represent there. But overall, based on the health points and medical healing points we provided, this game is very balanced, and that problem should not prevail, and if anything, it's just a punishment for somebody who's trying to rack up mentation points by saving the easy people instead of actually trying to save as many people as you can.
So this game is, as we've said, is about managing mentation points. Obviously, in the battle, you are going to lose people. It happens. Sometimes there just is no way to save them, so you will be losing mentation points. But just because you lose mentation points doesn't mean you lose. However, if you reach 0 mentation points, whichever side does that first will lose, and the other side obviously then wins. However, if at the end of all 3 rounds, neither side reaches 0 mentation points, whoever has the highest amount of mentation points wins, which makes sense. And then obviously, if after all 3 rounds, both sides have the same amount of mentation points, it's a tie game, and if you want to try to go again to see who wins, go right ahead.
So I'm gonna wrap this up here. Kind of talk about the business side of things and more of like the themes and production we had actually making our game. So first bullet says we play tested the games, which is very true. And when I say that, we kind of took a lot of elements of not only the gameplay, but a lot of the rule books. When we play the rule books, or when we were trying to say we had like an hour and a half to play with, the game would take 50 minutes. We find ourselves spending half an hour trying to read the rule book, looking at a YouTube video. I think that's where our main inspiration is. Let's just make an easy rule book. Why are we overcomplicating things? Just make it simple. So that was one of our big priorities, was just making an easy rule book. But we play tested some other games and got a lot of aspects from some of the games. One of our favorite ones was, I think, Western Front, was it?
I think so.
Yeah, so Western Front, a lot of math in it, and limited resources, which is what we, the idea of having limited resources and just kind of having a one-on-one battle with the math. We thought that was really interesting. There's another game that I played, I can't remember off the top of my head, I apologize, but the dice, where you have a success range. And that's kind of a lot of the inspiration. When it actually came to making these cards, this is just a playing card I got from Walmart, and our lovely friend who's a student here is a company, Instagram, Sticker Ella Company. She makes custom stickers using her Cricut. I designed these little things in Canva, bought Canva Premium, expensive, and then stickered onto these with little labels. And I think these came out really well for the time and money we had. And initially, when we were just testing the cards, we just literally cut out pieces of paper. We wrote the words, and that was how we were able to kind of test things and make sure everything goes right before we make cards, because we don't want to make cards and realize it's all wrong. The other components were obviously provided in class. The dice, thank you, Professor, the initial cost was about $20, and I know it's a lot. Maybe we got ripped off by L Sticker Company, who knows, but I don't think so. Our future would probably be, we're bringing it to market. So our one idea could be just selling the idea to a publisher who's a lot more qualified than us to produce a game, or we could try and become qualified and try manufacturing in-house, buy our own Crickets, or even what I would probably think would be a cheaper option would just buy the correct card stock and design in-house and actually print these cards ourselves. I don't know how to do that, but if I was, I'd learn. Future. Any questions?
Where do you come up with 40 seconds? That just seems like an oddly specific, instead of 30 or a minute.
So at one of our recent game sessions in class, we had little pieces of paper, and we would just kind of see what worked. Like, we start out with like a minute, and we realized, like, okay, we had a lot of time. There's no stress to it, and obviously it's a very stressful situation. We tried 30, and people were running out of time, so we felt 40 was the correct amount. If you're new to the game, there's a little recommendation. Maybe you want to increase your time a little, but like the recommended is 40 seconds. And testing it with other people, 40 seconds just seemed fair. It does seem like a little weird number, but that's where we got it from.
This game is about being a field medic in World War I. I'm Graham, and I'm an NREMT, licensed in the state. This is Kimmy. Essentially, this game forces you to learn how to do proper triage and while trying to stay alive so that way you can continue treating soldiers. For reference, in World War I, there is roughly 2 to 3 9/11s that happened every single day in terms of soldier casualties. That is how many people it is, and you need to try and save them. This game, we have multiple different versions of difficulty because you do not want to start out at the most difficult because it is impossible and you will end up dead. And it's currently a single player game that it's, hey yeah, survive as long as possible and you win if there's no more attack cards.
So it's kind of a very simplified version of what field medics were doing in World War I. There's attack cards and there's supply cards. To start out, you take about 3 attack cards and place them on the board wherever the dice tells you to. Hold up the board so you can see. Each of these hexagons is numbered. So when you pick up a card, you roll the dice and it tells you where to place it. And depending on the severity, like major, moderate, or minor, is what your tracking dice will be at. So that's how many turns you have before they die. So say this one I pulled was a moderate. So you put it down in the hexagon that it tells you to, and moderate starts at 4. And each turn you decrease that number by 1, and when it gets to 1, it's dead, and you have to put it in the discard pile.
And at the start of the game, you first put on 4 before you ever get a turn. So you have to try and catch up while not falling behind, and that's at the easiest setting.
So for the normal setting, we have a 4-sided dice because we found that with 6, it was a little too easy to move around. So you also have different tokens, bandages, water, and food, which are used to treat the wounded. So when you move, if you have to be in the same tile that the card is in to treat them. And if they are a major or moderate level severity, they have to be transported using a transport token back to the start before they're officially saved. Each card, if it's, like say it's a moderate again, when it is attacked, say you're in the tile next to them, because it's a moderate, it'll deal damage around them too. So you get up to 5 wounds that you yourself can take before you die. And so if you're, for moderate, if you're 1 tile around, you get 1 wound, and you get up to 5 before you die.
And once you get more than like a single wounded, then you also have movement penalties and you start being able to do less. So it will start to add up a lot.
For example, if you have like 3 of them, you can only, and you roll 4, you can only move 3 times because you can't move as far when you're damaged. Each card kind of just tells you exactly what you need to do. There's also an extra card called a supply run card. You have to keep it because if it allows you, if you're low on supplies, you can forfeit your turn of helping people and grab more supplies. But if that's the case, then all of your wounded will decrease in severity or increase in severity, and you'll more likely to die.
So it's a very fine balancing act between treating wounded, getting enough supplies, and then making sure that the wounded on the board, you can either get off the board or stabilize them enough so that way you can continue treating them once you get more supplies, or so that you have time to treat more serious people before getting back to them.
We kind of took the idea of the game from the game called Trench War. It was, we first started out as having it as simply a card game, but when we started playing it, we kind of realized that it was too simple. We wanted to make it a little more, not complicated, but a little more fun. So we added the board to kind of, simulate moving around during the field or during war. So, you have more chances of being injured based on the different attacks that are dealt by your enemy. So you're more likely to die. That simulates how dangerous it is out in the field. There's also a trench. That's where injuries like trench foot happen, and you have to deal with those kinds of injuries as well.
And at the most difficult setting, I want to say you have 4 or 5 new cards every single turn that you have to deal with, and you only get the same number of supplies to treat. So you don't need a prior understanding of triage and how to triage, but you will start to develop that sense as you go through. And triage is a very difficult concept to learn and implement well, to the point that there is specific effectively war games developed by EMS companies just for teaching triage to people for EMS that costs multiple thousands of dollars.
So we kind of wanted to make it simple enough to play that anyone can look at the rules. I know it's technically 8 pages, but we put it in big font so it's easier to read. We wanted people to be able to read it and understand it easily, and also have the game be fun. So I asked a few of my friends to look over the rules and stuff, and they said that they'd want to even play it because it sounded fun and easy to understand. So
That looks like a 4-page rulebook with lots of white space.
yeah,
Effectively.
pretty much.
Questions? Our second medical related game.
Yeah.
Where do you determine where the new cards go onto the board per turn?
Essentially, you pick up, roll the d20, and on the spaces, they're all numbered, and where the d20 is. So let's say I pulled another one, and I rolled a 4, so then it'd get placed on position 4.
So, like this one he just picked up was a major. So because it's a major, majors are, if you're in the tile that the majors are placed, you get 3 wounds. 1 outside is 2 wounds if you yourself are in it. And then, so he was right here, he'd get 1 wound.
Yeah, and for majors, it also affects the surrounding injured too. So let's say it's in the same tile. That same tile gets that in addition to whatever they already had. And if it's a surrounding tile, then they'll get, let's say it's major, then they'd get a moderate wound effectively. And if it's 2 tiles away, then it's 1 if it's a major. So it's, you can have them die before you ever have a chance to treat.
Yeah, so basically what he's trying to say is if it's, if this wounded card or attack card was in the tile right next to it and it was placed at a 4 severity, which is moderate, the severity would increase by 2, so it would go down to 2. So that would make it a major injury, and you'd have to get to it quicker before they die.
Yes?
Your board looks really well made. What was the process of producing that?
So I wanted to make it more like an actual board. So I took 2 pieces of cardboard and I kind of used like a paper mache technique, and I put 2 boards together and I just paper mache'd it and then painted it.
Is that a medic with a rifle?
Yes, that's because it's the World War I model I found for free, and I don't know how to 3D model, so if we were to go to production, I'd have to find a completely different one.
You could probably have snipped it off, but it might have fallen over forwards.
Yeah, that's what we were worried about, is that we wanted it to have
It
3
actually
points of
balances without the rifle. It's just, if it's at any angle, it needs it in order to balance and place it, so it's like...
Yeah. There was a few things that we would fix if we went further with it, is we would probably make the cards and board a little bit bigger maybe, or better cards, because these were kind of just handmade.
The biggest oversight that we did was we completely forgot, oh hey, storming other trenches is a thing. So we just forgot to have, oh hey, you tried to storming the other trench, you can have a lot more wounded. So that was an oversight, but that's an easy card to just add.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only way you might develop it is part of the process.
So, you said for the moderate and the major, so can deal damage to other injured or yourself around.
Yes.
Would that be something like gas, or is that something else?
So like one of these is like a cannon attack or an artillery attack. It would like the explosion would cause damage around them, right? It wouldn't just hit.
Okay, so it'd be instantaneous. I thought it was like overtime. Okay.
No, it's instantaneous.
Yeah, so it's, if you don't treat them, they start bleeding out more, which means, oh hey, they need to be treated quicker. And then if there's other attacks, then those attacks, depending on how large they are, will attack the surrounding tiles.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you win?
You stay alive until all the attack cards are played. Otherwise, the other end condition is you die.
The goal of the game is to save as many people as you can. So when you save them, you place the saved cards into a save pile, and at the end you count them up. And then your goal the next time is to save more people before you die.
Kind of similar to like Yahtzee in some ways.
So, just like a few of the other groups, we also did a medical version of World War I. However, this one, I want to do this game because I want to have it more of like the actual medical tent, like off of the front lines. So there's no combat aspect, there's no like running around trench to trench like the other two. This one I really just wanted to have just like the field house where they're operating and trying to save people. Because, like, I started looking into it a little bit, and they were just always overcrowded. It was always a struggle. The beginning of the war, they had like severely underestimated how many casualties they were going to have. So like the field tents were just constantly full, and they would say like there would just be bodies of injured soldiers who were still alive just sitting outside the medical tents next to like piles and piles of just limbs from amputees. And then once they got from like the field tents back to the base hospitals, then those started out at like 40,000, and then by the end of the war, most of them got pushed up to 350,000 for like housing of just the injured people. So this I really want to make a little bit more accurate, kind of realistic. So I put a lot of research into it, into looking at like the different kinds of injuries and what the most likely injuries were. So like for 60% of all the injuries that I found from the First World War were just from artillery. So then most of the injury cards that we had, I stacked the majority of the deck to just be artillery and shrapnel injuries. And then like as some of, yeah, and then like the other injuries as well as like the gunshot wounds and that, I found that those were predominantly in the shoulders and face region because of trench warfare. They were always kind of like tucked down, and there wasn't a lot of like body shots. So then I kind of stacked all those cards to be like that as well. Obviously, when they got up and ran over the trench, people still got shot in the legs and wherever. But that's that. And then, and then another piece I wanted to have was a lot of the like inventions and medical advancements throughout the war. I wanted to try and incorporate into this game. Anesthetic had been around for a little bit, so that one wasn't a big one. But antiseptic, sodium hypochlorite, was bigly introduced in the First World War. And that helped a lot with gangrene and sepsis, just overall infection, trench foot and stuff like that. X-rays was discovered in 1897. However, it took until the First World War for it to get really popular, as it was very cumbersome to have all the equipment and machinery. It wasn't used very common throughout the First World War, but towards the end of it, it was starting to come around more and more and more. And then as well as like infections, such as like the different STDs from like when they would go, and then they'd worry about blood-to-blood contact between soldiers that were injured, as well as just basic diseases like the Spanish flu, how there was a big Spanish flu epidemic right at the end of the First World War. So then we also try to add in a little bit of like weather effects and such like that into the game. So like rain is an effect in it, exhaustion of your players, yeah. And then the different, like infection killed a lot of people, so a lot of the amputation is based on infection. So this is the board game itself. Quite simple.
Yep. So with all this research that we've done, we came up with Field 10. So the game pretty much it's a card-based game where it's pretty much played by chance in a way. So the main thing involves a d20. So at the beginning of the round, you would roll a die and say you get a 12, then you would draw, I believe...
Depending on your difficulty.
Yeah, depending on the difficulty. We have 4 different difficulties, but say on the easy difficulty, if you roll a 12, you draw 3 frontline cards, which are the injury cards. So then if you draw, like, pick 3 random ones.
We'll go with that one. You can keep talking while I draw these.
Yeah, so each injury card has different, like I said, there's like artillery limb, artillery midsection, there's different levels of gas attacks, and each one has different criteria for treatments. So let's say barbed wire. Let's say it takes 8 turns until death, and its only treatment is bandaging because barbed wire was pretty easy to
It
survive.
wasn't that, just lacerations, but the risk of infection was high for those.
Yes.
So you roll again for chance.
Yep.
With those.
Yep. So then with so let's say with the artillery midsection, you have 3 turns until death, and then you can either have to do surgery or abandon. Say if you want to do surgery, you have a 20% failure chance. So if you roll a die again, you roll a 1 through 4, the person dies. But if you roll anything higher than that, they survive. So I rolled an 11 here, they're fine. But they have to keep going through. They would have to keep moving in until then, a couple turns until they're completely out.
So yeah.
And then there's only 2 doctors and 2 nurses, or depending on the game difficulty, there's 2 doctors, and you only be 2 doctors at a time, and 1 doctor can only do 1 patient at a time. So that's where the strategy comes in of trying to allocate what doctor needs to, like, what patient is the most dire at that point. Kind of like what your game where you can't waste resources or whatever.
So then, as you would roll, like you take all your injury cards and you put them on the top side of the board, kind of signifying outside the medical tent. And then as you go on and keep rolling, as the cards start to stack up, you get more and more just people piling up outside.
Mm-hmm. And the thing with gas is, on the right side, this is for the sick bay for gas. There can only be 1 gas patient at a time, and their only cure for them is rest.
There wasn't any like actual treatments for gas really by the beginning of the First World War, and it was pretty much just lay them up and have them recover a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And then, so we have also some other different cards. We have like the medical cards, which are, I was thinking, yeah. So we have different types of medical cards. So we have bandage, operate. You can amputate, you can abandon, or you can stabilize. Those are the ones that you can play at any time, and you have an infinite amount of. Then we also have limited action cards, such as anesthetic, antiseptic, X-ray,
splints
and stuff like that, where you can have a certain amount. You have a certain amount that you can play. But they all have different things. Like say with like the anesthetic, it would give you a plus 40 morale, which is also another big thing that separates our games from the other medical game is morale. This really didn't have a real world translation. This was more just for the pure game mechanics. So at the beginning of the game, you start off with 100 morale, and if generally every time a person dies, it's minus 10 morale, right?
Yes.
Minus 10 morale.
So if you try to help them,
yes.
they die.
Yes, if you try to help them and they die, it's minus 10. But if you abandon them, it's a minus 20. And
so you start at 100 morale. Once you drop below 0, you'll lose the game, basically.
The only way to get morale is either A, you successfully operate, which is a plus 5 morale, or you play certain limited action cards, such as anesthetic, which give you a plus 40. If you're using the limited action cards, you cannot get above 100 morale, but if you're using normal, if you're going like through surgery, you can go above 100. So,
yes.
Yeah. So the point of the game is to either go through all your different cards and have them all survive, or your morale goes down below 0. Once you're at 0, you don't automatically lose, but you're kind of in like a deadlock where you have like pretty much one last round until you're completely dead.
The last card deck was chance cards. And these I really liked. These were just randomized cards that have they affect your play. And this was how certain soldiers have diseases and how you can get some materials back. So there was a couple major cards was disease. Syphilis and gonorrhea were 2 of the most common STDs for the First World War. So there's always a chance that one of your soldiers coming back that's injured is going to have one of these diseases. And chance cards are drawn based on number of turns. So on easy difficulty, you would draw a chance card every 10 turns. The medium and hard, it's every 5 turns. And then the last difficulty is every other turn you draw. The other piece of the chance cards can also be environments. So during the First World War, they started to use vehicles as ambulances, like motorized vehicles. And so that benefits you, gives you more time to treat your injured. Whereas, if it started raining and it got really muddy, all your stretcher bearers would be exhausted, and then they wouldn't be able to bring as many people in. You would have less time until all your people die.
Mm-hmm. And kind of going on with the difficulty, we have 4 different difficulties. So we have easy, medium, hard, and then our personal favorite, Why God. Why God is the very hard or the honor mode in a way. where pretty much like in every other difficulty, if you roll a 1 through 3, you draw no injury cards at the beginning. So it gives your doctors and nurses a bit of a breather, so they can focus more on healing the other patients that are currently in like the sick bay or like the tent. But on the Y God, if you roll a 1 through 3, you automatically have to draw 1 card.
And
So
then, as they stack up as well, like on easy difficulty, you could probably make it through the whole game, which is just treating all the injury cards. You shuffle them so they come in randomized order, but your goal is just to get through all the injury cards. You get through all the injury cards potentially without having to use your limited action cards. Nor medium and hard difficulty, or medium difficulty, you definitely need to use the action cards, but it's just kind of, you can use them however you please. Hard, you have to like strategically place them throughout the game, and then in Y God, it's designed so that you do not win.
So the whole point of the game is to pretty much strategize who is more important, because the nurses also have an ability to stabilize a patient to where they can push back their death 5 turns. So let's say you draw say you draw an artillery midsection which has 3 turns till death, and say you already have 3 or 4 stacked up in that row. You can have one or both of your nurses stabilize 2 of those patients and push them back 5 turns, so that gives you more time to focus on other people who actually need the help. But you can only stabilize 1 person at a time, and you can only ever stabilize a patient once.
Mm-hmm. And it's stabilized because you can only treat 2 people at any given time.
That's the difference between doctors and nurses, where they all kind of have the same things, except for the fact that doctors can operate and amputate, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they can operate and amputate. Besides that, there were some things that we kind of did want to put in the game, like
there is some stuff that, like, when we were researching through, like, oh, this would be cool to add. Tuberculosis was another thing, but we weren't sure exactly where to add that or how. Later in the war, as more and more people, they needed more and more bodies, they dropped the standards for recruitment, so there's less healthy people coming in. And prosthetics and plastic surgery was another common, like, invention of the First World War. But we considered adding that from around, but that wasn't really, like, in the field. That was more of, like, base hospital or once you got out sort of thing. So we felt like it didn't really belong in this game.
So, yeah, that's Field 10.